The biggest trend is probably the bigger importance in telling stories, telling them in a way that's relevant to a particular audience and not trying to satisfy everybody with it.
This is Velocitize Talks, and I'm Andy North. I'm joined today by Gianfranco Chicco, European Marketing Director for the Webby and Lovie Awards and editor of the Craftsman newsletter. Thank you for joining us today.
It's a pleasure.
This is a momentous day for you. The Lovie Award finalists were announced today. Talk a little bit about that and a little bit about the Lovies in general and just the excitement that's building around that whole program.
It's interesting. So the goal of the Lovie Awards is to celebrate excellence in the European internet, right? And if you look at what's happening in Europe, culture is a very important thing for the work you see, because there's some work that, is valid all over the world and, it's amazing. But we also want to celebrate the things which come from different places, different regions, different cultures, and how that shapes the internet. One of the things we've been seeing, and this is not exclusive for the Lovies, we've also seen it at the Webbies, is that the growth in video branded content is amazing. And it's sometimes agencies, startups, when they realize that they need to tell a story and make that story better crafted from a technical point of view, but also meaningful to who they're talking to. So you'll notice that even if it's, let's say, a big advertising campaign, what they're doing in different regions inside the same country will change based on that. And this is one of the biggest things we're noticing, how all this diversity has an effect in the work, which goes beyond the pure craft part of it.
You were from Argentina. You've lived all over the world. You were trained as an industrial engineer. How does one with that sort of background get to this point as a marketing speaker who's spoken all around the world?
So it's funny because, yes, I'm an industrial engineer, and I think I worked as an industrial engineer. I've been involved with the development of logistics for industrial plants and stuff like that. But my first job, about 20 years ago, was in what you would today call a startup. Now it was in South America. We were launching an internet portal back then. And if you think about what I did there, it was managing processes, people, time, resources. So it was not building a physical facility, but it's very similar. So I think that while I never formally trained in marketing, I've done some upgrades to my kind of formal education later with masters and stuff. I think that the work of an engineer is managing those things. And what probably makes a difference, but this was not affected by my training, but probably it's more my personality, is I care about people and interacting with them, and that's probably what the marketing side comes in. So I find that engineering is my scaffolding. I might think in a certain way, but it's not the antithesis of creativity or dealing with people. Actually, I think it makes me more attuned to those tasks.
Is that where you see brands moving towards now, that blend of the digital and the physical world?
Absolutely. First of all, because we are constantly jumping between those two worlds. Every time you grab your phone, your tablet and stuff, you're in your digital self, maybe for 5 seconds, and then you're back in the physical one. So it's just the same person with different layers to their life. And it's very difficult, the same way that you can see how people posting photos to social media has influenced how they eat and how they interact with others, even if they're in a physical restaurant. So I see digital and physical as an extension or a complement to each other. And I think that from a branding point of view or a marketing point of view, it's about focusing on the things that don't scale, because that's where you can add the biggest difference. At least from a personal point of view, that's what I find most exciting today.
Great. Given that the Lovie Awards finalists were announced today, what are some of the trends you've seen with some of the finalists and ultimately the winners over the last few years?
One of the key things probably is, as I mentioned before, there's a big effect of the culture and the production of the work. Now you see that a freelancer working alone or a company with a big production budget can create great quality stuff. So that's not what differentiates great work anymore. Yes, you have to nail the craft, and we have a lot of categories that focus on craft. But as I mentioned before, branded entertainment, telling stories that someone cares about, is becoming bigger and more relevant. And it's not just in the very short forms, often formats. You often hear that people say, oh, you need to, share your message in the first 3 seconds or 6 seconds and stuff. Yeah, I mean, if you follow certain metrics, that might seem the case, but what is 5 seconds and 3 seconds and stuff, you know? We definitely look for something longer and deeper. And of course, if I'm being exposed to a lot of stuff, I'm gonna probably discard them if they don't catch my attention today, which is a sign of, you know, our connectedness or sometimes addiction to a lot of these things. But the biggest trend is probably the bigger importance in telling stories, telling them in a way that's relevant to a particular audience and not trying to satisfy everybody with it.
So in a way, it all does come back to the original storytelling, which is based purely in the physical world at some level. Are you seeing, given that you're affiliated with the Webby Awards as well, are you seeing many differences between the Webby Awards and the Lovie Awards, or are they all very trending towards the same direction?
There's a few differences. For example, an area where I see very big differences has to do with podcasts. And it's mainly, I think, because the US has a huge internal market for podcasts, and then they produce content in English, which can be listened to by people all over the world if they speak English, while content being produced in other languages usually has a smaller platform or a smaller audience, just because less people speak French or less people speak German or Dutch. So you find that at the Webbies we see certain winners which are producing content in the US, but not only, that have 1 billion listeners, 300 million listeners and stuff, which in some of the native languages from Europe, that's a bit more difficult. And this changes the business model, because if you can have, if your business model has to do with advertising for, you know, a podcast, on one side, you know, American or English companies that produce content in English have a bigger platform to sell those ads than other markets, which means that smaller markets are looking for different business models. So it diversifies the reaction, and that's a very clear difference I find between one award and the other.
Interesting. I must admit, I was looking at some of your LinkedIn articles, which I found very interesting, and one of them caught my eye, and it was about how content is becoming tighter and tighter and tighter, to the point where some brands are using emojis to connect with audiences. Do you have any thoughts on that? Have you seen that in some of your experiences out there?
Well, you know, often the challenge when you're communicating, especially only via text, and this is a huge part of our digital interactions today, you know, with messaging platforms and whatnot, is that it's very difficult to convey emotions, tone of voice, irony and stuff. So, you know, emojis started, at least, I don't know if this is official or not, but in Japan, you know, with the texting. And I remember using it, you know, I had a feature phone when I was living in Japan and stuff. And the way they do emojis are slightly different to us, because they use only text, and they have a different physical representation of faces and stuff. They don't use just, you know, the colon and the bracket for a smiley face. So I think that the more we connect, the more we want to convey the right intention, the right sentiment, and emojis come into place for that, or animated GIFs, you know, GIFs, according to the creator, that's the right way to pronounce it. It's still a big debate, I know, but so with animated GIFs, they might be funny or not, but beyond that, you're trying to convey a thing. You know, maybe in the beginning of texting, if I sent you a message that happy birthday, that was a novelty. Now that everyone gets a notification, it's, you know, your birthday, and you get 1,000 messages.
Right.
How do you stand out? How do you make it different? How do you make it more heartfelt in a way? And sometimes, you know, the best way is to call someone, right? Because you find that you're limited by text and emojis to transmit something that you could only say with words in a certain tone of voice.
Right. So it's not necessarily replacing content, it's giving it more context.
More flavor.
Yeah.
In a way. I find emojis to be the spice of text communication. So you can decide to say the same thing, but in a slightly different way. And culture affects also a lot, what emoji you use for what. I've made, because I have friends in many different countries and cultures, I often had the people, why did you use that emoji? I said, oh no, sorry, for me it means this. Oh, sorry, no, we see it for something else. So there's even that kind of thing that emojis cannot, you know, solve.
Do you see that merging beyond the social world? And like we talked about, there were some brands that were using it. Do you see that entering sort of the lexicon of business?
So today I replied to a business email with 2 emojis, not only because I wasn't mobile and I wanted to do something quick, but I was really grateful for something. Someone was helping us spread the word about the Lovies. And in that context, they use it a lot in their communication stuff, so it felt appropriate. Now, I remember the campaigns using only emojis from a couple of years ago, and that looked more like a PR trick in the moment than an established thing.
Right.
Check on whatever you share photos and stuff. You'll see that there's a mix of text, a mix of emojis, and a mix of hashtags. Right. And all of those things complement. Often you'll hear, and remember there were a couple of funny skits about this, people even in the physical world say, oh, hashtag something, or oh, this is great, or it's an instant moment and stuff. Now, that's an effect, maybe in a couple of years it would have changed to whatever platform we have. So that's kind of a cultural layer that evolves and it's never static. So yeah, why not? If your audience uses it, and if you use it too, because people can tell when something is a fake, emojis can definitely move into not just a pure texting or digital world. You've
worked all over the world. You've lived all over the world. Are you seeing any particular marketing trends that are of interest regionally, or are they all sort of trending in the same direction?
Now, I see one that it's quite global, but then it's happening in different ways in different markets, which has to do with voice. And especially this year, at the Lovies, we paid a lot of attention to voice and what's happening, what's how you design for voice, what's the opportunities for brands, for individuals and stuff like that. So we had kind of a deep immersion into this. And voice, it's happening globally because voice, if you can speak, and of course not everybody can, it's a very natural way to communicate. It has a very low barrier to entry. People of different ages, can use voice if they speak, and they use the device, the software they're using uses natural language. They don't need to learn commands, right? So that's quite interesting.
What about personalization? We've seen brands and so forth and agencies giving a lot of lip service to personalization, but has anyone truly cracked that code yet?
Here is when I find a lot of inspiration in craftsmanship, because I think that what people prefer for most things that they care about is not so much personalization, but something that is personal, which is very different, right? I can email 1 million people with the same message, just replacing their name, but that's I just tweaked the name. That's not really personalization, right? And this can be useful for a lot of great things. If you're communicating about, I don't know, general announcement or stuff, you don't want to, you want it to be very clear and stuff and just address it to everybody. But other things, if it's something you really care about, and if it has to do with the arts, with your hobbies, with your passions and stuff, it's the same way that, you can go to a huge supermarket and pick stuff by yourself, but then if you're a coffee lover, you want to go to the place with the roasted coffee and have a chat with them and say, oh, but last time you bought this coffee, so why don't you try this one? That's a real personal experience. And probably a newsletter that says, hey, this is our latest coffee, wouldn't satisfy that thing. So I find that the difference between personalization and personal is not applicable in all spaces. But especially brands that are working with a strong cultural element, and it could be sports brand and stuff like that, are paying more attention to the personal stuff. I guess, and while the jury's still out on this, that's why they start to interact more with smaller people that can influence. I'm not a big fan of the word influencer per se, but people that can influence their community rather than big celebrities, because they find that the big celebrity could be great for a massive general message. But if you want to reach different people, they don't, that person is on a pedestal and they don't reflect themselves in that. So they have to work more on a personal, low volume, unscalable dimension.
We've talked about personalization and voice. Are there any other technologies that you see either currently making headlines or on the horizon that you predict will be big in 3 to 5 years?
It's always tough, right? And I think we all follow the Gartner curve of innovation and stuff, and how there's a lot of hype around a certain thing and then it disappears for a couple of years and then it finally comes up again. Well, I think that voice is one of the most exciting things happening now because of the potential it can have. There's something that has to do not just with having things connected, but having things responding to you. So, for example, I could have my and I actually do have my thermostat connected, my lights connected and stuff, but that's just a technical function. The real value is when it can allow me to have a better life. So I find that now that technologists and designers and copywriters and artists, they're all starting to work better together. They're starting to use technology, which often, the most exciting technology today is technology that's been developed for the last 20 or 30 years, right? It's only now it's mature enough. Is the technology is being applied to become more useful to you, and this goes back to the personal against personalization.
Right.
Because, for example, I got an email a couple of days ago from my thermostat, or the company that runs my thermostat, saying, oh, this is the average temperature in the houses around you using the same technology. And that was, okay, but I live in a top floor, so my house, if it's sunny, and it's been sunny, is usually warmer than others. Tell me something I could use, something valuable. How can I save money maybe, or something like that. I don't care if my temperature is 0.4 degrees hotter. If you live in a basement, probably there's a physical reason for that.
We always ask our guests if there are any books that they would like to recommend to our viewers. Are there any that come to mind?
I'll share the one I finished a couple of days ago, which came out, I think, a week or so ago. It's from Stephen Johnson, or Stephen Berlin Johnson, and it's called Farsighted. Now, the book is not perfect. I liked some of his other books more, but the book is about how do we make decisions, and it shares a few different ways, on the process and decision making for personal things, for professional things. But what I particularly liked is that the author makes the case that decision making is a skill you'll use almost every day in your life, for your private life or work and stuff. But nobody teaches us how to do decision making. Yes, if you work in finance, maybe you'll learn how to bet on one stock and not the other. But his argument is also we should start teaching this at school level. Because even if you have to decide where to go to eat and stuff like that, or what impact is that going to have, in your happiness, your finance, whatever is the dimension you're measuring, it's key. And it's the same way as cooking. It's something I believe everyone should learn, because if you are under normal conditions, you'll have to eat every day. So, knowing how to cook, it's a good trick to have. I think that decision making is the key thing. So the book is Farsighted by Stephen Johnson, and it came out definitely this month, probably 10 days ago.
That's excellent. Thank you. My guest today has been Gian Chicco, European Marketing Director for the Webby and Lovie Awards. Thank you so much for joining us.
Andy, thank you very much for this.